Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-r-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and I am so happy that you're joining us today. My guest today is Nancy E. Head. She's the author of Restoring the Shattered, and she and I are going to be talking about if you are approaching or entering or even well into your empty nest years and you think you are done, you are not. We are going to talk about how many things there still are to do, how these can be the most productive years of your life. So Nancy, thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Thank you, Gina, for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Yes, and we've done a video, and I will put that in the show notes where you share your story as well. So people are going to have a great opportunity to learn more about you. You're on a video on YouTube, which will be in the show notes. You'll be on this podcast, but specifically today, Nancy, we're talking about how to maximize our midlife years, being productive and giving back. And so why don't you share a little bit about how your midlife journey started with giving back?
Well, when all my kids were finally grown up, and one was away at college, and one was away at basic training and then AIT. And so they were coming and going in those years. Now, I'd always had it's kind of an interesting way that God can grow a passion in you. I remember being told as a child, you need to eat that. A starving child in China would love to have that. And, just all the things that I saw in the news going on in Asia. And my husband had been to Japan. He was working on the first trans-Pacific hot air balloon flight. So all this, Asia came into focus for us. And we decided, maybe we should consider. So we began to pursue online, and it was really neat how it started that, we can leave two sons at home alone for 6 weeks in the summer because they're plenty old enough to take care of themselves. So that was the number one, and we're all transitioning. When your children are all beyond your reach, that's very uncomfortable. I remember one was deployed in Iraq and the other one was at college, and I realized after he'd settled upon it and gotten his scholarship money and everything that, oh, that's a party school. I didn't know that. Yeah. So, and I would think about that when I was at work teaching that, I don't know which one to worry about more. Who's watching out for these kids? I actually worried about the kid at the party school a little bit more sometimes. But you can't just stay there. And of course, again, they're beyond your reach. So we became really interested in this idea of going to Asia. And we started to look online, the opportunities to teach English, and that don't require you to be a teacher, that don't require you to have a degree in English. They simply require you to be an English speaker. Most programs require you to have at least some college or a college degree. Doesn't matter what it's in. My husband has a degree in meteorology. I think he's a better English as a second language teacher than I am. I get very passionate and excited, and I talk too fast for second language learners. So, but I would never know that had I not gone. And our interim pastor, we were between pastors, we had our interim pastor over for dinner. And we told him we're interested in going to Asia. And he said, oh, well, don't sign up for anything. Let me make a phone call. Unbeknownst to us, he called a friend of his who regularly went to Asia and said, how old do you take them? Because he actually recruited most of his team from college campuses. So we would be among the older members of the team. So apparently they take them this old. And so we went off to Asia. I had a week of training in South Carolina, and then a few days to be oriented in the Orient, and then And then we dug into 4 weeks of teaching, intensive teaching. And you learn about your students and you learn about the culture and you teach about the culture, your own. And that's a wonderful way to introduce Christianity because you're talking about Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving. And it's fun to talk about the preparation of Thanksgiving dinner because there aren't any turkeys in Asia. And so and bread is a new idea in most Asian countries. They've caught on to it. I was very happy to know that they caught on to bread when I was there. So having gone twice, and it was very different to go once and then to go again 6 years later. It was very different for several reasons. We went to the same place. We were teaching in the same town. We were working for the same school. But the culture had changed considerably. The atmosphere had changed in very remarkable ways. Things to do with who was our president and how well liked we were. A little bit better liked in 2005 than we were in 2011, honestly. But very much appreciated by the Asian students generally are very appreciative. There are a few that you'll find that suffer from the entitlement disease that Americans have. But for the most part, you'll find a great deal of gratitude in Asian students. So the teaching American culture is exciting. Who doesn't want to talk about, here's what we do at Christmas. Here's how we celebrate Easter. Here's what it means. And there's a great deal of fulfillment in that when you're starting to feel like I'm running out of purpose at home. So I did someone else's laundry. We're, of course, sharing laundry facilities in an apartment with 5 or 6 teachers. And I moved somebody's laundry from the washer to the dryer. And she was mortified that she'd forgotten her laundry and was apologizing. And I said, oh, honey, I've been doing other people's laundry for 30 years. It's okay. So it's a really neat thing because you have students, but you're building a team with your fellow teachers. And some of these people are going to be teachers and some of them aren't. And the maturity level of the young people that I saw actually kind of put me to shame a little bit. There was one teacher there who is a kid with a degree in chemical engineering. And he said when someone mentioned the trip to him, he knew he was going and he knew God would stretch him in the process. And he told me he works very hard at the time. He was working very hard not to count the days till he could go home. He had junior high boys in a room with no windows all day. And so we taught from 8 in the morning until noon. Then the students eat and take a nap. No matter how old they are. Till about 2:30 in the afternoon, you teach till 5. You have a break for an hour and a half to go eat dinner. And then you might come back in the evening for an English club. Maybe we'd watch a movie. Maybe we'd just sit around and talk. But the idea is to immerse them in the English language. So, but you don't really get, days off as much. And you're, constantly working with somebody, even on the weekends. Sometimes you go to Walmart or something, but you don't want to go to Walmart alone. You want to go with a native speaker with you so that you have somebody to translate because not everybody speaks English where you're going. And learning Asian languages, some of them are phonetic, some of them are tonal. The tonal ones you're probably not going to become anywhere close to fluent in 4 weeks, unless you really worked at it before. We met someone who had been in the country for over a year, and she actually was taking, as an English teacher, she was taking Chinese lessons, other languages. She was fluent, but it was a year, and she was just getting to the point where she could write in the language. So you grow and you stretch and you see all the things that you can do, and there's a whole new life after the life that you had raising your children. And it's very rich and very fulfilling, and you get to model. I remember when my daughter said, all of my children's grandparents have gone on a mission trip. And so she was delighted that her children saw the father's parents going to one continent and her parents going to a different continent. And she was watching us. In her mind, she's thinking this is a modeling for them. So that's your job as mother, it doesn't end, it changes. And even though you don't have that day-to-day hands-on, here's your breakfast, here's your clean laundry, and, did you remember to take your vitamins today? You still have that tremendous amount of influence just in living your life and living it in a full way.
It's interesting how some of our energy has to go toward allowing that transition to happen in a healthy way.
Right.
Being aware of our own emotional needs too,
Right. I do remember that, sitting in that particular classroom. I only taught in this school for 1 year, but it was the year that my son deployed and the year that his brother went to college. And it dawned on me, everyone is beyond my reach. And the 3 older kids all lived in town. I could go see them at all, but I don't have that daily influence on anybody's life anymore, even if it's time to get up for school, or did you do your homework? I'd been caught up in that the oldest one is, so 18 plus 9 years is 27 years I spent mothering children into adulthood. And that's a long time of going from infancy. And we remind ourselves of this if we read the right books, James Dobson and all that. We remind ourselves that our goal is from the beginning to get them from this point to that point. And then we have to realize that beyond that point, there is still more for us to do. And what we're doing is still influencing them. And we might not even see it as our primary purpose necessarily, that, oh, my kids, I'll do this and my kids will see me doing it. No, we're doing it so we can do it well and we can influence the people we're doing it for. But a little side note is that my children are still watching me. And I could even mess them up a little bit, or maybe a lot, if I mess up a lot. That what I do in my life still really matters to the people who are close to me. And it's important to show them that there's not a time when you're done. And there's still so many things you can do. An international mission trip, or just being involved in your local community. That's also something we talked about in the video. Things you can do in your community to find a ministry and it's so neat today because there are so many different kinds that if you've raised children, then perhaps a crisis pregnancy center would be someplace where you could really make a difference. If you have a special skill of quilting or sewing or cooking or something, you could volunteer at a school to teach kids. And we'd be surprised today to learn, perhaps not even how many kids know how to thread a needle, but how many kids don't even know what a needle and thread is to sew a button on. I mean, we think about kids today, the buttons fall off and you have to go buy a new shirt. And that isn't the way we grew up. We grew up with the idea of, my parents talked about the Great Depression all the time and how things were in the Great Depression, and you sewed your buttons back on. So we polished our shoes to make them last longer. And my parents were both in the military too. It's the shoe shine thing is the big deal there. So, there are things I did as a kid that my kids didn't do as much, but most of them learned how to thread a needle and how to sew something together. And most of them learned their way around well enough in a kitchen to keep themselves alive. And everybody learned how to do their own laundry, or to process that. You used to call it processing the laundry. And, you bring your 5th baby home from the hospital, and it's very helpful to have older children who know how to take the clothes out of the washer and put them in the dryer and which one to hang up so they don't shrink. We did shrink a few sweaters along the way. But, oh, honey, you weren't supposed to put that in the dryer. Your baby doll can wear that now. Sorry. But you will lose a few items in that process. But that whole goal is to get them to the end. And, we still have something to say in their lives. And I was very gratified. In my last birthday, I got a journal from my daughter-in-law, I think, for my son and my daughter-in-law, but I had a feeling that she's the one who picked it out. It's a journal that you write down things that happened to you in your life so that their child can read it someday. And that's a neat thing. I know when my father turned 80, I bought him a journal and I bought him a cross pen. And he wrote down the story of his life, which was quite fascinating. He'd been orphaned by the time he was 13. He was the only one of 11 siblings to finish high school and to go to college. And then he joined the Navy during the war after Pearl Harbor. I mean, it's a fascinating story. He was a medic in the South Pacific, and all he wanted was to come home. And he never saw any action, thankfully. And so he wasn't marred by any of the action that he didn't see. So passing all of those things along. And then when you do fascinating things that are fascinating you after in your empty nest, you become fascinating to your children. And because they do reach the age, they're not there when they're 18. My mother is so cool. No, they're not there yet. But when they're about 30 or 40, you actually, you know, I think it was something Mark Twain used to say, that when he was 18, he knew his father was the stupidest man ever. And by the time he was 21, he couldn't realize how much the old man had grown in only 3 years in his wisdom. So our perspectives change. And I think it's very important for us to show our kids that there's still life after them, and that we're still useful in our communities, and that we can still make a big difference. And there are people out there who acknowledge our wisdom and hear us and our wisdom we can pass along, we can lift people up. And that's really, I think, the job of any person in any stage of life, is to lift other people up.
Yeah. You know, so many people have actually done the most amazing things in their life after the age of 50, 60, 70 years old, you know.
Right.
It's amazing how you can take all the life that you've lived, and when you can channel it into something, because when you're raising children, you're kind of scattered. You've got sports, and you've got school, and you've got other extracurricular activities. You've got laundry, you've got shopping, you've got your husband, and you've got maybe a job, and you're literally doing 500 things.
Right. Exactly.
It's kind of nice to get to the season where you're like, okay, I can give this more concentrated focus, which allows us not only to do it well, but to possibly do it at a faster clip than maybe 30 years of mothering, allowed us to do. And there's so many things. People write books, they start businesses, they travel, they start blogs, they, like you said, they sew, they volunteer, they do all kinds of things. And the thing that I like, my personality is, I don't have to do just one.
Oh yeah, exactly. We're free now and I did that. I woke up Saturday morning and wrote my blog for yesterday that I posted yesterday. And then I cut out one of my granddaughter's Easter dresses. It took me most of the day, started to put it together, put the zipper in it. I make Easter dresses there will this year for the very first time be 5, because we're expecting a great granddaughter, the second one, pretty much any minute now. Within the next couple weeks, we expect to be holding little Zoe. So now there are 5 dresses. And so now I have to plan a little bit further ahead of time and to get it all in. And the mothers of the older girls said, now you can graduate these girls. And I'm like, no. They're excited about this year's dresses, or in the pockets that are going to go in this year. They wanted pockets. I said, okay. So they seem to really be excited about this. So I'm on board. I have picked very much simpler patterns the last couple of years. That's the other thing. You can decide what you want to do, decide what it's going to take to do it, and don't try to make the foo-fooiest thing ever that will make you stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning the night before Easter church service. Sometimes it's difficult to balance. That's the other thing. I've heard people say that, when I retired, I want to go back to work and get a rest, because now that I've retired, I have so many more things to do. And I'm not retired, and I'm considering actually taking on a different role in my employment that will take up more of my time next year. And that's also something I'm balancing and figuring out how's all this going to look and work next year. But that was one of the things my husband used to say, you're such a good writer. Why don't you write? Are you kidding? With the job I have and the kids no, I don't have time to do that. And once I ratcheted everything back a little bit, I started to write, and it felt so good. And I started to go to conferences, and it took 4 years until it turned into the book that it is. And starting the blog, and just having that voice in the community is, however the community is, as you were doing. It's not, maybe it's your neighbors, maybe it's your coffee clutch once a week, maybe it's your Bible study once a week, or maybe it's your podcast that reaches out to anybody who can grab a hold of it. And so you still have a message, no matter what your age, what your stage in life. You have a different audience. We used to have the audience in the church nursery with the baby on her lap, and a bit of a captive audience too. And the conversations there were always, well, my baby does this and my baby does that, and then you learn that maybe this is a better way of doing things, or you could try this or try that and get more sleep at night, perhaps. They're just the little tips of the trade that you can share. And then now we're in this other season. And I sat down at a meeting the other night and got out my phone and showed, here's my great granddaughter. Well, this lady whips out her phone, and now I'm looking at her grandson, and he was only 3 pounds when he was born. And the stories just pour out of us, and we're feeding each other with this wonderful way of being. And but we were at a meeting about a community organization that involves a community organization that we're pouring into this community organization. But in the meantime, we're also feeding each other with our personal stories, because what we're doing is also that outgrowth of our love for our families.
It's interesting because we really do get our identity a lot of the times from being a mother.
Yes.
We live, eat, sleep, breathe, and think about it 24/7, no exaggeration, for years.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest transition for empty nest, is figuring out, who am I without that job, without that responsibility, without that expectation, when the kids are like, I'm good, Mom. You can go do something else now. So I think if somebody's listening to this podcast who maybe isn't there yet, it's a good time to start really getting your mind to begin to transition, getting your emotions to begin to transition, really prepare yourself. Because
right.
Even if you're preparing yourself, the reality is still something you have to go through, and we don't know how we're going to feel until we're in it. Some women are like, bye, Felicia, and other people are like, they don't want to let their babies go.
Right.
And I think, like you said, our goal is to prepare them to become independent, productive adults, hopefully. That's our goal. And then we get to model for them what someone does with the rest of their life.
Yeah, and I think that can be very helpful too, because my kids are in the throes of raising children. One has a 2-year-old, and one has, the youngest just turned 13. So from the oldest down to the youngest one with kids, that's all very different, and it's going to look very different. But in 5 years, my daughter's children will all be grown, not sure out of the house necessarily, but it all changes then. And maybe it doesn't all change. Then I expect that they would still hang on to the jobs that they have. It'll be very different because they teach at a school where their children attend. And there are only 2 children still attending out of the 4. But again, that whole, my daughter was so impressed to see and so happy to see the grandparents going on a mission trip, but she's seeing her in-laws and her mother going on a mission trip. And so it wouldn't be a weird thought for her when she turns 50 or 55 to say, I can go on an international mission trip too. And I can get involved in this ministry or that ministry. And it's kind of interesting to me. She's the drama teacher at our school, and she's a junior high youth director. Years earlier, she saw herself perhaps having a ministry for women, and that could be ahead for her. So it's a fascinating thing to think about. And as you say, you don't know how you're going to feel about it until you get. And I just keep going back to that moment when I think what I had felt was an unease, and I couldn't identify it. And the moment that it dawned on me, everybody's beyond my reach, I thought, aha, that is my unease. And, at that point, you have to give everybody to God. But you also say, all right, now what am I going to do? And I love your idea of thinking about that ahead of time and asking you, spending that time in thought and prayer, contemplating, what will I do? And as you said, too, it's like there was a commercial, I think it showed around the time of back to school, where the child goes away to school and mom and dad are redecorating the room. So they're not having a problem here. They're not dealing with the empty nest. They're ready to move on. Here's what, when you leave, here's what we're doing with that room. So another way that you could, by the way, another way you can ease that flow, and my husband and I did this, is to have an exchange student. And typically you might think, look, the benefit of having an exchange student is to do that when your children are there, exposing your children to this other culture. And we did that. We had 2 short-term exchange students from Asia, and we had a German boy. And it was later on that we had more kids from Asia. And that, again, influenced, they were in classes with my grandchildren. So that pouring out of the other culture and the other way of thinking, the other way of doing things and looking at the world, and maintaining those relationships as you can. Sometimes your exchange student will go back to their native country, and you might hear from them once or twice a year here and there, and then they kind of fade away, and maybe your Facebook friends if you're lucky. But sometimes we have 2 exchange students that lived with us. One lived with us for 3 years, and she stayed on a student visa, and she's at University Park finishing up her college degree, looking at grad schools now. So we've maintained a relationship with her for not quite a decade, but kind of pushing toward, that's a long time. And, every couple of times a year we go out to dinner, we get together. The last young man that we had came back and spent 9 days with us at Christmas time. And the caveat is, you aren't their mother. They have a mother. You're the host mother, and they'll call you mom, but you're not the mother. And it actually is a kind of a neat way to fill that empty nest, as long as you remember, I'm not going to be the primary woman here. I'm secondary always. Your mother is always your mother. So, but it doesn't mean I can't have an influence. And every so often one of them will call with a question about, one might call with a question about the car. The young man called us and asked my husband, is this an appropriate rent to pay while I'm in college? And my husband said, yeah, if you're splitting it with 4 other students. And this young man's in Seattle. It's like, no, that's my share. Things are much more, we did tell you things would be more expensive there, didn't we? So it's just having human connections too. And it's different for everybody. Maybe an exchange student's a possibility. Maybe, helping people at your food pantry, maybe that international ministry short term, maybe that international ministry long term. Ooh, isn't that scary? So I met someone when I was in Asia who moved there and got a paycheck all year round. Maybe she came back to the United States once or twice a year and permanently employed over there, having a great time. So this is an exciting time, because if there were things that you dreamed of doing, and I know that most of the people I went to Asia with were people who were putting off marriage and, just approaching that at the end of college, or they finished college and they're getting ready to move out into the world. They were doing all this kind of stuff first. I didn't do it first, but I didn't die without doing it. So I'm 50 years old and going on a mission trip, and it was exciting to think of finally getting to a country that I never dreamed I would actually set foot in. And so if God has given you a passion for a place, look at how many opportunities there might be to figure out how you can get there. We usually don't regret the things we did. We usually end up regretting the things we didn't do. and plenty of room for regret all throughout life for things we did and didn't do. But I think when you get older, it's the things you didn't do that maybe you haven't missed your chance though.
Well, I think that when we are thinking about life, sometimes it's revisiting something that we stopped doing too. It's things that maybe we always wanted to do or we didn't have the time to do. And it doesn't have to be, I think for some people, it's overwhelming to think of making such a huge life change, but just start somewhere. It could literally be painting or recovering your chair. Maybe you've always wanted to reupholster a chair. Like start somewhere, doing something that interests you and see where that leads. Because for some people, they're like, oh, I was just going to do this for myself. And then it leads somewhere. You just never know, right? Some people have a more clear vision. Other people, it's just a journey of investigating and being curious about, what do I want to do with myself?
Oh, my sister-in-law, I was just talking with her. She is an electrical engineer in Texas. And she sent all of her young ones off to school and said to my brother, I need to get out of the house. I think I'll, and she was thinking, well, I'll go to the local university and take, basket weaving or something. And my brother said to her, you're smart, take engineering. I'm sorry, that's not my idea of getting out of the house. It's a class in engineering. But she's an electrical engineer today. And it's worked out very well for her. And, again, modeling education. She's got my nephew, I don't want to say he's pushing 50, and he's getting his master's degree. He just got his bachelor's degree a few years ago. And, that whole idea in life, and it's one of the things that in the first school I taught, they had two philosophies that kicked in with me. One is that the school isn't the primary teacher, the parents are. The school is the agent of the parents. And the other one is that we are teaching children how to learn so that they can spend their lives as lifelong learners. And that's when you can say, well, you just don't want to get to the end of life and say, I missed all my chances. And seeing yourself as that lifelong learner says, oh, well, now I can do this thing. I've devoted my life to my children, to my household, my family, all these years. And now it's time for me to do something else. That dream that I had, this is a resurrection time for dreams. And that can just change the future and influence others too, to say, well, maybe I can resurrect my dream as well.
I find a lot of my friends go right into grandparenting and they don't pursue things. And some of them would like to, some of them are content just grandparenting, being available because their kids are working or whatever. So I think the journeys can be very, very different from person to person. And I think there's even seasons to our midlife and our late life, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe this season does require of you, or maybe you choose, maybe that's a better way of putting it. Maybe you choose to be the support system for your grandchildren and your children. But even in that, I don't have grandchildren. God hasn't blessed me with those yet. But I think, when we're parents, we're so busy parenting, which is a wonderful job. It's, I think, the best and hardest thing I've ever done. But I think when you're grandparenting, you can have a different kind of influence because you're not fully responsible, right? So that is a worthy thing to do when you have time with your grandchildren, being very intentional about the experiences and the memories you're creating.
Well, I agree.
So we're talking about how our midlife and late life can be so much more purposeful. I had interviewed a gal and she raised 6 children as a stay-at-home mom. So she had her very first job after 50.
Ooh.
And it was her dream job. And she walked in at the lowest level, ended up at a high level. All kinds of incredible things happened, but they were all, that was the one thing she had her mind on, right? That job. But she would meet people and that would lead to something else. And then that would add to, and eventually she wrote some books because her daughter decided to go toward publishing and became her co-author. So I think we can have these dreams and ideas that might seem far-fetched or they might seem kind of out of the realm of possibility. But if we look back at what we've gone through, experienced, and done, we realize that, I don't know about you, Nancy, but sometimes I look at life and go, I would have never imagined the things we've experienced or the things we've done or how life has turned out. And I don't mean that negatively, but you're kind of like, wow, you would never know when you meet the man that you're going to marry how it's all going to turn out. So that's the same journey we're still on, and we have less, quote, responsibility now, which gives us more scope for the imagination.
Right. And I liked what you were saying about grandparenting too, that we're, it's a different role. It's still important, and you're still speaking in. And there's the people who are keeping their grandchildren every day or raising their grandchildren, and who really haven't left the parenting. It just shifted to a new generation and basically starting all over again. That's huge. And again, it depends on whether you're parenting full time your grandchildren, or you are, keeping them during the day. It is a different role, and it actually gives you an opportunity to speak into. And I never had this, and this is what I want to be so intentional about my grandmothering, because I don't have any memory of a grandmother. My father's parents died when he was younger. My mother's mother died when I was 18 months old. I have this tiny memory of my grandfather, basically when my mother was taking care of him while he was 9. So a very minimal amount of grandparent influence coming my way. I had an aunt and uncle that were very beloved, that were a lot like grandparents to me. So I wanted to, every year I take the granddaughters to the Nutcracker ballet. We go and see some version of the Nutcracker every Christmas season, and the Christmas dress I make for them, and they're kind of obliged to wear it we're getting to that point where it's ooh and nah, maybe, but it's still that, we do the Nutcracker, and we, every year we go pick blueberries, and afterwards we go to this special ice cream place where they make the ice cream into like a cartoon character, and the kids think that's just great. And I have a picture of them when I took them apple picking. Apple picking, by the way, is a whole lot different. Blueberry picking, you spend a fair amount of time getting, because blueberries are pretty small. You pick apples and you're done in 5 minutes. And I had to stop. That's $34 worth of apples there. We're done. That's enough. So
I did that with cherries. Oh my gosh. I brought home, and I ate them all too, but yeah. I love to go, picking fruit is a great thing to do. But you know what? You could hike. You could join a hiking club. You could join a writing club. There's so many things that we can do. And I think back to what we were talking about is we can take the time to nurture some of our lost, forgotten, set aside passions, desires, or even curiosities. I think some people feel like almost overwhelmed with, now I have to find my purpose. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like I said, like that guest of mine that just went for the job, but it led her down so many other paths because she was just willing to say, I'm going to try this, and I'm only going to do this. But you know how life is.
Right. And you touched on it earlier with your mention of seasons. And that's something that just is becoming more and more clear to me, that I am not in my life. I'm in this season of life, and it's going to look different from the next one. It's going to look different from the previous one. And that, I think, if we can grasp that even sooner, that I'm in a season. And honestly, when your kids are little, you somehow have this silly notion that this is the way life's going to be forever. That you're just always going to have these people and it's funny because my friend even said, I miss my kids. She said, there are these adults in their place today and we're really good friends, but I miss my kids. And I thought, yeah, I do kind of, one of the things that we did when the kids were little was to go out and rent a movie and sit and watch. And it was funny. We rented Rear Window once. If you remember that Alfred Hitchcock, Jimmy Stewart movie, we went back to the movie rental place a week or two later. Can we watch that again? It wouldn't be cool for me to sit in a room with my 5 kids and watch a movie again. It's clearly not going to be the same. I can't imagine we could find a movie that, it'd have to be Rear Window to find something that all six of us would actually enjoy watching. But you move on to a time, and we had a birthday this past weekend, and we spent time sitting there talking about what we've seen at the movies. It's very interesting to watch this whole dynamic unfold. But I think that understanding, and if you have any younger listeners that are wise enough to listen and to know, hey, this season's coming for everybody. Now, what are you going to do with it? And I think we look at it as, sometimes we can look at it as a loss, like the glass half empty. Oh, God has taken my children away from me. It's like, no, you raised them so they would be independent. Or you can look at it as the glass half full. I have this new season before me. It's like a Christmas present you haven't opened yet. What's inside the box? So,
and it could be a whole bunch of things. Somebody else that I interviewed, so much fun. She wrote a book, and it was fiction, but she also started a band. And what they do is she's hilarious. She's got a great sense of humor. So all of the songs are like about life, but from a very kind of sarcastic, funny standpoint. Yeah. Like, she was a single woman. So one of her songs was, I Don't Want Your Husband. And it's just like, calm down. I don't want your husband. You don't want him either. Just funny. She's kind of a comedian to music. And I think she always just thought, I love to sing. And she thought, well, why don't I just get some people together and do this? And it's not her career. Although she has been doing it more, we can really think outside the box because we've been so driven for so long. Right. Accomplish, that there's a certain amount of what brings me joy right now.
Right.
What would I just want to experience? It could be traveling, just going somewhere you've been meaning to go.
Right. Last June, my husband and I went to Scotland and Ireland, and he retired from his primary job. He's opened a business. And he wanted to go. So we looked at Italy, and then we found out how much Italy cost, and we quickly switched to Ireland. I was so thrilled. We went to Scotland. Scotland was fine. It was nice. It was really interesting. When we were coming across the water in a boat from Scotland to Ireland, I had the overwhelming sense that I was going home. All of the times when I was a kid watching the evening, my dad was big on the evening news. It was Walter Cronkite, and he didn't switch the channel. Belfast blowing up all over the place when I was a kid. And we sailed into Belfast. There we were in Belfast. It was fascinating. And, and I kept thinking to myself, there but for a few potatoes. I'm an Irish native, perhaps. So that kind of, and I kept thinking, just think about all the things we could do around the house if we didn't take this trip. And then I thought, nobody's ever going to walk in and say, oh, Grandma, you have the coolest kitchen ever. It was so great when you finally put the rest of the cabinets up. That was terrific, But to bring everybody a little gift from Ireland and to make that, and my daughter did one of those genealogy things. So she's 40% Irish. You're more Irish than you are anything else. So this is a piece of history carried with me now that I can pass along. And we want to go back to Ireland now. I don't know if we're ever going to get those kitchen cabinets, but but yeah, this is all part of the whole thing about how you're going to live your life and the decisions you're going to make. And and by the way, when you do go to Ireland, don't expect to wear your shorts and your swimsuit very much. The high temperature the whole time we were there for 12 days, and the high temperature once was 68 degrees. It's June, and you get up in the morning, it's 46 degrees outside. I like this. I'm not sweaty all the time in June. This is great. So, but next time I plan to take a coat with me instead of the 4 layers of sweatshirts that I was wearing, because I didn't think it would be that cold. But it was just, I love what one of the waiters told us is, welcome to Ireland, where only the rain gets warmer.
I took my dream trip this last year to Europe. I went to Paris, which I had the Eiffel Tower pictures and things around me, and I couldn't wait to go. It's even on the back of my phone. And I fell in love with Paris. And we did Belgium, and we did 3 places in England. We also did an ancestry test. I'm like 60 something percent Great Britain.
There you go.
Yep, we're from the same part of the world, but there is something to be said for dreaming about that trip. It's not as expensive as one would think, especially that
Right.
part of the world. Everybody speaks English for the most part. Even in Paris, we had no trouble communicating with like 90% of the people. But there's something to be said for us in our later years of life, midlife and later, to get some experiences, to experience the greater world, even just for pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
just see a little bit of our own country or see another country. Because I think I'm very purpose driven, and I think you are too. Like, what do I need to be doing with my life? Kind of purpose driven.
Right, right.
And I like living at that level. But sometimes we need to find joy in just being and experiencing something. And I
Right.
think doing it for us for the first time, maybe in 30, 40 years, might feel a little uncomfortable, but it's really nice to go, I want to have this experience, and I'm going to do this because I can.
It's the bucket list mentality. And that, again, if you were tired of nothing, getting up and watching TV every day or whatever,